Obsession, the new horror feature film debut from director Curry Barker, is the best horror movie in years. It left me leaving the theater with a feeling I rarely ever experience walking out of a movie. The kind where you feel an overwhelming sense where you almost just can't believe what you just watched, and I say that meaning it in the best way possible. Obsession follows Bear, played by Michael Johnston, as he romantically pursues Nikki, played by Idney Navarrete. After buying a one-wish willow, a device supposedly meant to bring any wish he has true, Bear uses it to win over Nikki, but soon he discovers that this wish has come with a lot more baggage than he initially expected. It's said through dialogue early in the movie that not every love story is a romance, and that couldn't be more true here. From the second Obsession starts, Michael Johnston shows a great level of vulnerability as Bear, immediately dragging me in and making me interested in him and his romantic interest in Nikki. This was already enough to set my expectations for the rest of the film pretty highly, as I saw that Barker was willing to not just rush right into the horror, but instead start with fleshing out these characters. And at first, the movie also sort of gave me a false sense of security, giving explanations for some of the weirder things that happen early on that were reasonable enough at the time for me to go with them, even if I knew they probably wouldn't remain reasonable for very long. But still, pretty quickly, Obsession starts to become completely unhinged, and it just keeps ramping up the entire runtime. The movie is genuinely terrifying, and I say that as someone who is rarely ever frightened by horror movies, but there were multiple times throughout this where I felt shivers down my spine. And one moment in particular where it's like my entire body sort of recoiled backwards in a way that I'm not even sure I've ever really felt before. At the same time, the movie is also violently uncomfortable and uneasy the entire time, and it made me feel almost gross watching it. But I really should reiterate, this movie is fantastic, and I say all of this to compliment the film, although these are also factors that almost push this to being something where I'm not sure I'm going to be able to watch it again anytime soon. Obsession also surprisingly incorporates a decent amount of comedy, having me laughing out loud several times, but it never takes away from the scariness of the film, and weirdly, I would actually say it adds to it. It strikes a really unique balance as the comedy sort of comes from a place of an awkward, uncomfortable feeling, almost like you're laughing to comfort yourself. One of my friends had a good way of putting it, in that it's almost like some scenes are a game of Russian roulette for the viewer, where you don't know if you're going to get some kind of twisted punchline or something that's downright horrifying, or even both just seconds apart. For me, as I've said, to laugh out loud and get full body chills multiple times is a testament to just how incredibly Barker manages to strike this balance. The writing is a reason for this too, as it is very tightly written and wastes almost no time. But despite this, Obsession is also not afraid to allow moments to linger for an uncomfortable amount of time, which in my opinion worked greatly every time it was attempted. Across the board, it feels like Curry Barker has an excellent handle on everything that he wanted to do here. This film really has all the makings of something created by a much more experienced director, making the fact that this is a debut feature that much more impressive. For me, Barker has immediately become one of the most exciting names working in horror today. Speaking of exciting names, both of these central performances from Michael Johnston and Idney Navarrete are fantastic. Navarrete in particular is completely outstanding in every sense of the word, being wholly committed and making sure to not just let her performance be one that rides on yelling and screaming, as she really does a phenomenal job in the quieter moments too. She's the biggest reason why this movie works as well as it does, and a lesser performance would have made this movie a lot less remarkable than it ended up being. It's honestly probably just straight up one of the best horror movie performances I've ever seen. I think she has a very, very bright future. Obsession also doesn't have a single moment of cheap horror or a forced jump scare. It really allows itself to be scary just based on the merit of everything else. It doesn't take away from itself with meaningless, awkwardly placed moments of horror just to get a superficial reaction out of the viewer, which is so refreshing when compared to other recent horror films. It feels like nearly everything released in the last few years has incorporated something unearned and cheap at some point, and it always just takes me out, always takes me away from any of the fear that I might be feeling. But that's just not here at all. Everything is earned and effective, and it's one of the most impressive aspects of this movie. Obsession also stands out amongst recent horror films because it is very strong emotionally. Underneath all the insanity that is this movie, it never really lets you forget the core conflict or forget how the main character got himself in this mess in the first place, or let you see past how Bear has been able to manipulate the situation to his advantage and not let you forget that despite Nikki's behavior, that she is still a victim and that Bear has inadvertently brought a lot of this upon himself. This sort of goes back to what I talked about earlier, about how the movie starts with so much vulnerability from him, but it's because he's never able to be that vulnerable with Nikki that the rest of the movie even happens. The title Obsession also has a bit of a double meaning. The obvious one is that Nikki becomes obsessed with Bear after he uses the One Wish Willow, but really it's also Bear's obsession with Nikki that allows this to happen, that allows the film to go in the direction that it does. We, as the audience, know that Nikki's actions are not her choice, that they are coming as a result of the One Wish Willow, and that Bear very much knows this but still continues to be with her. This makes some moments throughout the movie really quite uncomfortable, and this is probably the main source of that gross feeling that I mentioned having earlier. So as much as the horror in this movie comes from how Nikki behaves throughout, it also definitely comes from how Bear takes advantage of her, and this adds a good layer of depth to this movie. And there's an undercurrent of tragedy and sadness that flows throughout this entire film. Maybe at some points you don't really feel it just because of the intensity, but then you get these moments where the film allows itself to breathe and you can really take it all in. Especially by the end of the movie, as I reflected on what I had just watched, those emotions really started to set in. It's really just incredible how much this film is able to weave into its story, with the horror, the emotion, the uncomfortable feeling, the tension, the comedy, the themes and difficult topics that it explores. It all just works together so well. I really can't overstate just how impressed I am by this movie, and even though I don't necessarily think it's perfect, I really don't think there's a whole lot here for me to talk about as far as negatives. And the more I talk about it, the more I'm continuing to convince myself just how great this is. I had high expectations going into this, but they were still surpassed, something that really doesn't happen all too often for me. I kept thinking to myself, there's no way this movie is actually this good. At some point, it's going to go off the rails and not stick the landing. But it was fantastic all the way through. For me, Obsession is a 4.5 out of 5 and is absolutely my favorite movie of the year so far. If you'd like more film reviews like this one, I would love for you to subscribe and leave a like on this video, but any amount of support is appreciated. Thanks so much for watching The Final Take, and have a good day.